Chances are, if you're watching this, you have had at least one of those light bulb moments when you say, what a great idea for a book. Maybe you sit down first chance you get and just start cranking out pages. I've tried this. There is this one school of thought, the just jump in and start method. And there's a certain excitement about that idea. I've heard more people talking about it lately, the danger of planning too much. Because it's true, at some point, planning does become procrastination. Taking courses, doing research, organizing. You can do that forever and never actually get around to doing the thing you say you want to do. But just jump in and start is the other extreme. I'm pushing back on it a little today in the context of writing novels, and here's why. Most of the time, when we say, what a great idea for a book, what we're really saying is, what a great idea for a premise. A premise being this overarching idea. With my own writing and with writers I've edited, if we try writing to a premise, our time gets wasted, the plot gets muddled, and what could end up being a great story actually ends up being wonky or boring. I mean, we've all seen this in books and movies and shows. Good idea, bad execution. I'm going to craft an example along with you today to show you a much more reliable alternative to just jump in and start that's actually going to end up saving you time. We'll apply 5 techniques, and by the end of this video, we'll have an idea not just for a premise, but for a whole book. A premise is boy meets girl and they become space travelers, or what if a mutant species of vampire turned into werewolves? Maybe it's in the form of an image you want your book to start or end on. Maybe you just have a title. That's what happened for me with my 3rd novel, A Wedding in Whimsy. It was gonna have a wedding. That's all I knew. These are absolutely starting points. But if you just try sitting down and writing wedding hijinks, I mean, that could be anything. And if you're using a first draft to figure out the basics of where your story is going, your writing will meander. It might get repetitive of itself or even of other books. And it'll take you forever to write because you're trying to find your way to this vague idea, this premise. So instead of writing to a premise, try writing from story building blocks. We do this by exploring characters and situations, working our way through the world of the story, formulating what actually happens scene by scene. We're writing from a foundation. So how do we start doing that? All right, here's our example premise that popped into our heads. What if there were fortune cookies that could actually tell the future? Now, I'm sure someone somewhere has come up with that premise before, and that's okay, because we're just using it as a jumping off point. And if you've heard the phrase, there are no new stories, what that really means is there are no new premises. That lack of new premises might actually end up helping you in this process. We'll come back to that. Is it premises or premises? I don't know. I'm probably going to go back and forth between those two things. To find out what your story is, first ask yourself why it is. Why do you want to write this novel? What questions do you want to explore during the course of this novel in a way you've never seen done before? And I'm being deliberate here when I say, what questions do you want to ask instead of what is it you want your story to tell people? Telling people what you think is very limiting. Asking questions allows you to explore all sides of an issue through different ways your characters react. It allows for readers to explore different viewpoints. And ultimately, you'll reach a broader audience because you're acknowledging varied ways of approaching an issue. So maybe with our fortune cookies then, we want to raise a question about faith. Should you follow your faith at any cost? Let's say our protagonist, Henry, keeps getting fortune cookies that end up coming true. So he starts believing in them, basing important life decisions on them, life or death decisions on them. Should he have total faith in these little cookies? Is he interpreting them correctly? Do people who care about him have a different take on how far his faith should go? And for your stories, keep brainstorming the questions. See what comes up and surprises you. Outline your chapters. And hang on, because I know a lot of you don't outline. There's a cutesy-wootsy name for not outlining now. Pantsing, as in flying by the seat of your pants. I never say that word except to mock it because it's so cringe, which is another trendy word I hate. Let's move on. If you don't create formal outlines and that works for you, fine. However you map out what's going to happen in this chapter that leads to that chapter, etc., that's what I'm talking about here. For every scene we write, as well as the overall book, we need to account for certain elements: a protagonist, their goal, the stakes of that goal, and an antagonist. If you haven't seen my video on the conflict formula, that's going to spell this out a little bit more, and I'll link it in the description. Clearly, we're not going to outline an entire novel of Henry and the fortune cookie together today. But let's identify these core elements for the overall book to demonstrate how we could then apply the same idea to individual scenes. Henry is our protagonist. He needs an overarching goal. Let's make it relatable and fortune cookie free to start. There's a top executive job opening at the company he does data entry for, and he's vying for that position because he's way overqualified for what he's doing now. What's at stake? He needs the job now because his rent-controlled apartment is going condo in a month. And how about we make his antagonist the CEO of the company? Once you've got these elements set for the overall novel, we would go scene by scene, applying that same conflict formula to create the book's rising action, complications, and climax.
Come away, we'll run to...
Character bios can be so much more than just hair color, height, born in the USA, whatever. Use those bios to flesh out all the perspectives I talked about earlier when considering different facets of a question. Different backgrounds, philosophies. Through what lens does a character see an issue? For Henry, what if we throw a complication into his whole job interviewing process? He's become privy to some nefarious business practices of the CEO, and he wants to tell the authorities, but he gets a fortune cookie telling him to keep his mouth shut about it or he will suffer. His girlfriend, Shauna, who doesn't believe in any kind of fate or God or magic cookies, tells him, ignore the cookies, call the FTC. The next step for us would be to flesh out Shauna. What happened in her past, or how was she raised to form her beliefs? Why are she and Henry even together when they seem to have such different opinions on destiny? Maybe they're just finding out this difference now. And bonus if there's not a clear right or wrong here. Stories tend to be much more poignant and immersive when readers understand both points of view, or at least why our characters feel the way they do, even if we agree more with one or another.
With the stars to guide.
One of the secrets of good books is that every scene leads somehow to a new complication that deepens the protagonist's journey toward his ultimate goal. That's what keeps us turning pages, upping the stakes. You can't deepen anything if you're just repeating the same conflict. When you write to a premise, repetition happens a lot because you haven't identified yet what the specifics are or where your characters are going, let alone why. This argument between Henry and Shauna, then, should be one road in Henry's journey. Whatever comes of that scene, we build on, and we raise the stakes. They don't just keep having this same argument over and over and over. Let's say that Shauna convinces Henry he needs to go to the FTC, but maybe he needs more evidence. His fortune cookie that night says, the answer you seek is in the walnut desk. The CEO's desk is walnut, so he has to break into that desk, right? Fortune cookie says. We've even got a little irony here. Shauna's advice came from not believing in the fortune cookies. And that advice steered Henry directly back to the cookies and into this escalation. What if Henry gets caught? What if he blames Shauna for that original argument? And now their whole relationship is in jeopardy. Now we've got multiple roads to explore. Look how far we've come from our original premise in just the last 10 minutes.
Adventures we'll have every day.
Earlier, I said the idea of there are no new premises can actually be a big help in this process. If you're stuck at any point when you're creating your story's building blocks, that's the time to consult the best friend of writers and readers everywhere, the local library. If we're stuck as we're building our fortune cookie foundation, if we can't find an exact match for that idea, maybe we page through some magical realism or fantasy books, because it sort of sounds like that type of story, right? The books don't even have to be good. Your book does. But maybe a sappy character or a predictable turn in a bad novel inspires you to take that seed of an idea and make it better. Obviously, don't outright copy another author's idea without putting a new slant on it. Leave that to AI. Hey, if any of this worked for you, didn't work, if you have thoughts on any of it, or want to yell at me for dissing pantsing in AI, leave a comment. And remember, above all, believe in your writing and just keep at it. You can do this.